A 50-foot humpback whale dies a slow death. The local North Stradbroke Island community are witness to the tragedy as it washes to their home shore with a rope embedded around its tail. Its body is infested with mites and infection. Years later, the community find out that its skeleton will be strung up for display overlooking the beach where it died.
We believe that the whale comes from the ocean. Those bones should go back to the ocean.
I feel extremely sad for the traditional owners that are here because they're being ignored.
They're totally disregarding what the community is saying on all different levels, black and white.
There's a lot of anger and upset around this project.
Community opposition have been camping on the controversial site for 12 months to prevent what they believe would be a tragedy. This is an investigation into the fight to prevent the whale on the hill. I acknowledge the Quandamooka people, traditional custodians of the lands, waters and seas where this investigation is placed. I pay respect to elders, past, present and future. North Stradbroke Island, also known as Minjerribah, is a beautiful, natural and enigmatic place. The only way to get here is by boat and ferry. It seems so far away from the commotion of political life, but there's barely been a quiet moment in the island's history. It's uncanny that a small island should have such a big story to tell. Minjerribah is only about 50 km from the centre of Brisbane, but the island managed to stay relatively underdeveloped and has retained a sense of cool beachside living with lots of quaint beach shacks and loads of lush bush and wildlife. The Redland City Council estimate around 2,000 people live on the island. At the township of Point Lookout, as you walk toward the popular North Gorge Walk, you'll find the Quandamooka Truth Embassy. There's handmade protest signs declaring things like, "Protect and preserve, our ancestors are watching." State government wasted $4 million taxpayer dollars. Country, not coin. On the opposite side of the walkway, a glossy official sign advertises the proposed construction of a large open-air structure housing a 15-metre whale skeleton. I'm confused by the sign because the project has an Indigenous name, Yallingbilla Bibula, which means whale on the hill. When I inquire at the Quandamooka Truth Embassy, they explain that their own Quandamooka Aboriginal Corporation is behind the proposed development. I'm going to need to give you a little bit of background. In 2011, the native title rights and interests of the Quandamooka people were recognised by the Federal Court of Australia. So formed the Quandamooka Yullaburrubi Aboriginal Corporation, also known as QYAC. The corporation is the cultural heritage body that manages and protects the Quandamooka estate and interests. Around the time that QYAC was forming, the Queensland Government and the Redland City Council were discussing an economic transition strategy which would prepare the community for the end of sand mining. Sand mining was a contentious issue because of its environmental impacts on Minjerribah's fragile ecosystem. But it's been the island's primary source of economic activity for over 60 years. So this Whale on the Hill project is one of many projects in the economic transition strategy which aims to place tourism as the island's primary source of income. Here at the Quandamooka Truth Embassy, there are about 6 tents lining the small clearing and a large communal tent in the middle with a long table and a makeshift kitchenette set up just behind. For 12 months, the community, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, have been camped out here in these tents on the headland. Their goal is to prevent the whale's skeleton from being strung up on the headland site. Locals set up the tents initially to stop the construction in February 2021. The group say they take shifts at the embassy and work together to provide food and water to the volunteers staying on site. The headland is high and exposed to the elements and subject to severe weather, and they've even lost a few tents to the harsh winds. The group's unwavering commitment in these conditions is a testament to their passionate objection to the Whale on the Hill project.
I remember the first time someone called me and they said, "Julie, do you know anything about the survey pegs on the headland?" And at the time they were upgrading the pathway, and so I thought it was related to that. And I said, "Oh, I think it's just to do with the pathway where they're doing the grading and putting all the gravel and stuff down." And they said, "Oh, we've heard that they're going to put a building there." And I'm like, "I don't think so."
That's Julie Elliott, resident for 28 years. It's busy here today, and I get a strong sense of community spirit. Cups of tea are being made and chocolate cake is being passed around.
Oh, it's lovely. Everyone, most people know each other and they all support each other and, bump into everyone wherever you go. Like when I have visitors and you're sort of walking around and you go, "Oh, hi," and they go, "Hi, Julie," hi. And it's like, do you know everyone? It's like, well, you just sort of don't take it for granted, but it's like you forget that not all communities are like that, whereas we are.
I asked Julie how she felt about the Whale on the Hill project.
Shock, really, because no one can believe that anyone would even consider putting a building here. I mean, many years ago there was an old tennis court here, and it wasn't a full-size tennis court, it was just a bit of a roughshod one, and I think they had a little clubhouse. But that's been gone for well over 50 years. And so everyone had just, because we see all the wildlife here, and you just sort of think, well, they're not going to touch that, it's on the headland, and plus it was heritage listed.
It was World Environment Day, 2018, almost 7 years after the whale died, when Minister Jackie Trad announced its skeleton would be hoisted up at Point Lookout. She said the Queensland government had already spent $250,000 on feasibility studies, tendering and detailed design approvals for the world-class whale interpretive facility. The locals here say they started to write letters to the Redland City Council, and in response, the council released a carefully worded public communication to inform the public that Kayak was leading the development initiative, and that Redland City Council had transferred the parcel of protected land at Point Lookout over to the Queensland State Government, and were told to keep the transaction under their hats. So business entrepreneur and local Jenny Truman wrote to the Queensland Government. They told her there'd be no loss of community purpose land for recreation and scenic purposes, and that the community will still have access to the land. It's just that there'll be a whopping 50-foot whale skeleton there. She says the millions of dollars the government is spending on this project was supposed to be for sustainable industry, and explains that businesses like hers have had to scale down successful commerce because of the housing crisis.
And there you are. Thanks, darling.
We have 3 businesses that we run. We employ around about 30 local people, and to contain and keep our businesses running to where they should be, it's nearly impossible. We've had to scale down a few of our businesses because we can't get workers. We don't have any permanent accommodation. Everything now is Airbnb or holiday, and 90% of the time houses within the village are empty, and yet our young people and workers can't find accommodation. And that's why you see around at the moment there's quite a lot of vans parking around. So those vans have got people in them that have got jobs, but there's nowhere for them to live. So that's something that we have to deal with, and have to deal with fast, because it's becoming a crisis point.
It makes me wonder how the community will cope if the Whale Interpretive Centre does go ahead. The Queensland Government keeps saying the economic transition strategy projects like the Whale Interpretive Centre are supposed to boost the local economy through tourism, but they're not addressing basic issues already affecting the local economy, like housing. With no community consultation having taken place, Kayak announced they'd appointed Cox Architects to design the Whale Interpretive Centre, and they declared the clearing from the old tennis courts on the Point Lookout headland as the official site. It was Cox who appointed the engagement and communication consultancy firm Articulus to conduct the community consultations. One of Articulus's catchphrases at the time was "changing the way people think and act." It's a sentiment that undermines the principle of community consultation. And at this point, the community are already feeling railroaded and skeptical of the governing bodies because of all the secrecy.
So the whole process was, this is the site we've chosen, this is what we're going to do here, and that's it. No discussion. It's very frustrating. So it wasn't as if you came here and everybody could sit down, ask a question and everybody heard the same answer. No, they would split us all up, divide and conquer. And so in this section here, they had a plan, a very rudimentary plan of where the building was going. So this space here, say on the plan, looked like that, and then it had this little drawing here as this is where the whale's going to be. It's ridiculous, out of scale. 45-foot humpback whale skeleton, it's going to take up all that, not that. That's ridiculous drawing, what does it even mean? In the end, everybody had to stand up and yell at the guy. We're all here because we don't want it. And we want to ask you questions. We want the people here to answer us. Where's the man from Department of Lands who can answer these questions? Those people have to be here. Kayak has to answer the questions. Kayak members were standing over in the corner just watching. It was actually quite intimidating by one person who was affiliated with Kayak, very intimidating to anybody asking any questions that they didn't want asked about. Spiritually, this area here is spiritually significant because of the stories, and they're totally disregarding what the community is saying on all different levels, black and white.
I spoke with Liberal member for Udjuru, Dr. Mark Robinson. He tells me outsourcing community consultation to the stakeholder is highly irregular.
Unusually so, the government asked one of the stakeholders to run the consultation. It seemed to me to be an outsourced consultation to a stakeholder, but that, if I put that in another context and I said, here's a developer, for example, somewhere wanting to do a development, and I say, I'm going to get the developer to do what should be the broad-based government-run community consultation, I'll just ask the stakeholder to run it. We go, no, that's not right. It needs to be government, central. It needs to be done in a way where people can, there's a more neutral body, if you like. They had pretty much allowed Kayak to run the consultation, and it really was not a proper consultation. It's not been handled well. That's not how you do things if you want community input and you want a good outcome. That's what you do when you want to railroad it through. And again, it looks like that's what the government's chosen, sadly.
As well as holding 2 community meetings, Articulus offered an online survey. The survey asked questions framed to solicit specific answers, and it didn't give the community an opportunity to discuss their objections. The other interesting thing about the community engagement, it was conducted through the busy tourist season, when most residents are highly preoccupied with work. With a population just over 2,000, only 273 people engaged with the online survey, and only 49 of those survey respondents actually lived at the Point Lookout area. Over a third of the survey respondents didn't live on the island at all. The 2 community engagement meetings and the survey facilitated by Articulus carried weight in Minister Cameron Dick's decision to give the project a ministerial infrastructure designation, referred to as the MID.
The MID process is set up under the planning legislation, and so what it basically allows for is for the minister to make to issue an effective approval for certain development, where that would ordinarily fall to, in most cases, to the local government, to the council in the area.
That's Michael Berkman, Greens member for Maiwa. Members of the Truth Embassy say he sat with them on different occasions to listen to their concerns. I asked Mr. Berkman about what the MID means for the project.
When something's shifted from standard planning approval into MID, the requirement to pay infrastructure charges disappears as well. So infrastructure charging is something that happens in council approvals. It's an amount that the developer pays to the council so that they can provide things like sewage connections, roads, green space, all of those things that are required for basic service provision, but also public amenity in the area. So you do pay those charges under a regular planning approval, you don't pay them under MID. So that's another, in my view, another real dilemma with that.
And so one of the outcomes is that the community can't contest it once it's been approved?
Yeah, that's right. So anyone who makes what's called a properly made submission, if you make a submission that ticks all the boxes, you then have a right to appeal a decision, an approval decision in the Planning and Environment Court. That's not the case for an infrastructure designation. It's only, you can't appeal so much as you can challenge by judicial review whether there's been an error of law in making the decision. So the distinction is between a merits review, looking at the substance of the decision and whether it was the right decision in a regular planning approval, whereas MID is much more narrow in that you can only challenge whether the decision was made contrary to legal requirements.
So the ministerial infrastructure designation is tough to unwind once it's been approved. That's because usually MIDs are awarded to projects like schools and hospitals, really important things that communities need. The Whale on the Hill project was framed as a cultural facility, placing it in the same category as libraries and community centres. But the Quandamooka Truth Embassy are saying that it's nothing more than a monument of prestige, with no interconnection with the island's Indigenous cultural heritage. Is there any way that the community could stop this from happening?
Look, it's a question of political will. The unwinding of an MID is something that's, I've not seen that happen before. It's really a question of whether it's something that, that kayak or, that the approval holder chooses to push ahead with.
And this is what the community have been really upset about. They feel like the consultation process was already insufficient, and then the designation of the MID took away their right to appeal the decision in the Planning and Environment Court. Dr. Robinson says the Queensland Government should have encouraged kayak to go through the standard development and community consultation process instead of the MID.
They're not the proper instruments in order to build harmony and see the broader reconciliation of the community, evidenced by the fact that there's a lot of anger and upset around this project, which probably didn't need to be. They're instruments that get you immediately what you want without any argument from the community. And, as politicians, that's the sort of thing that should be used sparingly. And in this case, they're a really poor choice of instruments. It's just get the job done, get it behind us and move on and shut down the dissent.
I want to take a moment to background the life and death of the whale whose skeleton is intended for display overlooking the beach where he died. Because we're not just talking about the approved construction of a building here. I want to go back to the beginning, with the death of the whale on Minjerribah shores back in 2011, the whale at the centre of the conflict. The whales like the one that died on Minjerribah spend the summer months feeding in Antarctica. From about May, we see them heading up the Australian east coast toward the Great Barrier Reef and the Coral Sea to mate and give birth. From about September through to November, you can see them as they head back down on their journey south to Antarctica. They're often hugging the shallow waters, which provides some protection for the new calves. At some point in late September 2011, this young male humpback has encountered some trouble. Jenny Truman, who you heard from earlier, monitors and counts the whales during the migration season.
Yeah, so the humpback whale, a lot of people saw it. I saw it from my home. It floated across through the group. It was unusual in that it was a bronzy brown colour, and so immediately we went, what is that thing? Got the binoculars on it, and it, every now and then it would blow, and I go, that's a whale. And it floated very slowly. It had a fishing buoy attached and a rope attached to it. It was still alive when it came across the frontier. It actually floated in through the surfers down at Main Beach. People actually got off their boards and paddled over, swam over to it. But because it was being eaten alive by parasites, these little parasites would, as soon as they'd see or smell or feel fresh blood, they were jumping off and jumping onto the people. And then it washed in just down past the access and died on the beach.
One of the surfers Jenny mentions is longtime Straddy resident Mark Balkson. He gives an emotional recount of his experience of this event in a blog post. He said he watched with curiosity the strange sickly coloured whale as it swam an unusual pattern up and down Main Beach. He swam out on his surfboard to see if there was anything that he could do to help the whale. He noticed the rope wrapped around its tail. He says that when he got back to the shore, scorpion-like parasites the size of 10-cent coins were attached to his flesh, drawing his blood, and he says they were really difficult to remove. He says the poor whale was covered an inch thick in these parasites, and the photo posted with the blog certainly demonstrates the terrible state the whale is in. When Mark went to see the whale again the following day, it had died, but the mites were still feasting.
It must have had an agonisingly horrific, traumatic death. The decision was made by the elders, and I think a right decision, to bury the whale and bury it where it was, on the beach. So that was done, and I think that should have been where it stayed.
A few weeks after the death and burial of the whale, a Queensland Museum Network blog post on October 19, 2011 describes how experts flensed the whale over 3 days, cutting its flesh and removing the whole skeleton. They say the massive skeleton was transported to a paddock near the port of Brisbane, and the remaining flesh and blubber was buried. The disinterment of the whale was not mentioned. Just the fact that under the 1997 Nature Conservation Plan, the Queensland Museum is authorised to take, use and keep specimens of cetaceans if they are deemed to be significant. I couldn't find any definitive facts about how long the whale skeleton sat in the paddock, but Jenny says it was for more than a year. 9 years later, in early January 2020, the Brisbane Times pictured kayak elders performing a smoking ceremony for the whale before its skeleton was sent abroad to Canada to undergo an expensive, specialised cleaning and preparation process. I talked to Uncle Norm Enoch at the Minjerribah Morgumpan Elders and Council, who tells me the humpback whale as a symbol has been misappropriated from another mob as a way to pass off the Whale on the Hill project as culturally sound. He says although kayak claim the humpback whale as spiritually significant, it's a totem and a cultural symbol for the Whoopabara people of the Keppel Islands, which is more than 500 kilometres north of Minjerribah.
We didn't even hunt the whale because our canoes weren't big enough to go out in the surf. They say that when it beached itself it was a sign, and it was around native title, and I was thinking how stupid was that, you know? And this is what happens, you know, people get the wool pulled over their eyes and don't really understand it and told the full story.
He's referring to kayak's claim that the death of the whale in late 2011, at the same time that native title was recognised, is a sign that its bones should be displayed for all to see. Uncle Norm says his culture is being misrepresented, and the Quandamooka people have never displayed skeletons as a way to celebrate their culture or educate people.
What we do is take them back out on country and bury them back at country. Then that spirit will be at peace. We believe that the whale bones the whale comes from the ocean. Those bones should go back to the ocean. Just like we bury our bones back out on country. So the whale bones should go back. Only then will that spirit be at peace. Not put in a building so that everyone can gawk at it while its brothers are swimming past. Why not look at the real things?
Aboriginal corporations are operated by Indigenous people from the native title area. The intention is that they understand the needs of their own people and work toward their interests. Uncle Norm says this isn't happening.
What they're doing is selling our culture down the drain and stretching the truth. And if you get someone paying it up A lot of tourists wouldn't know whether he's right or wrong. It just looks good. People that are pushing for this is the Alone Aboriginal Corporation. And the people who run that, more than half, 3/4 of them, haven't grown up on this island and wouldn't know the real value and what really goes on this island.
He says native title hasn't lived up to his expectations. There are tensions between local Quandamooka residents and their own Aboriginal corporation because they feel like their basic needs are being placed second to the corporation's aspirations of tourism.
Traditional owner, I don't think I'll be able to afford a house here. Over 200 people living out in the bush in third world conditions. No sewage, no water, no power.
The matter of cultural appropriateness and the community's objection to the use of real whale bones was submitted to the Department of Planning for formal consideration before the MID was established. To this, Minister Cameron Dick responded with an exemption certificate provided by the Department of Environment and said they considered that the centre had minimal impact on the cultural heritage significance of the state heritage place. This is a sticking point for me because the Department of Environment are only responsible for state heritage, not Indigenous cultural heritage. That's up to the Department of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander partnerships. The Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act says a person has a duty of care to exercise due diligence and reasonable precaution before undertaking an activity which may harm Aboriginal cultural heritage. So why did the Department of Planning overlook this matter raised by Quandamooka people? Here's Michael Berkman again.
I mean, it's important that this particular issue is viewed through the lens of sovereignty, and that's extraordinarily complex when you've got an organisation like Kayak that is a body corporate that represents native title claimants. And I think, it points, in my view, there are some really important, shortcomings in the native title system and the way that then flows on to recognition of cultural heritage under state law, because it's not, without getting right down into the weeds of the law, our cultural heritage law invariably kind of privileges some First Nations voices over others based on the status of native title claims, whether they've been determined or not. I think the state bodies involved really do need to find better ways to ensure that the First Nations voices and concerns about cultural heritage are properly heard and informed decision making like this.
There are so many problems intertwined into the fabric of the Whale on the Hill project. Applying MID status to a cultural project which an overwhelming number of Quandamooka people say is culturally inappropriate. Spending millions of dollars on a poorly researched tourism project when there is a very serious housing crisis at hand. The construction of a building on heritage protected land, misappropriation of the whale as a cultural symbol, the voices of Quandamooka people and elders ignored, the display of a whale skeleton as an incredibly insensitive reminder of colonialism's fascination with taking bones to exhibit for show. The community want Kayak and the Queensland State Government to officially withdraw the Whale on the Hill project so they can get on with more important business like building sustainable industries, building homes for local people, establishing projects to support the well-being of local communities, and putting their energy toward caring for the precious land, seas and wildlife of Minjerribah. If you'd like to stay up to date with the progress of this issue, go to www.quandamookatruthembassy.com. You can sign the petition and contribute to the GoFundMe campaign to assist with legal fees in the fight to prevent the Whale Centre. This investigation was produced by myself, Monique Mita, music by Chris Zabriskie.